Alright, we've talked a lot about certain periods of time, such as the 90s, early 2000s, and even the 2010s on this little mini-series by now, but I think it's time we get to talk about one of the more influential periods of time in my life. The mid-2000s. More specifically, I want to focus on a specific period of time in which a lot of those watching may be potentially familiar with. The years of 2004 to 2006. But for me, it's more 2005 to 2006, but whatever, semantics, right? The point is, in the mid-2000s, a certain television block started up and aired several different shows to appeal to a wider and older demographic by the Disney Corporation. Its name was W.I.T.C.H, and its main goal was to effectively be the answer for Cartoon Network's Toonami block in the US. However, here in Australia, we didn't exactly have a Toonami block. Well, we did, it wasn't necessarily the same thing as Toonami in a way. But the point being is that when it began airing in October of 2005, the day following what was the free-to-air showcase for Disney Channel shows, Saturday Disney, Jetix premiered after the fact on Sundays. And when it premiered, nestled in between airings of Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce, Sonic X, and Alpha Teens on Machines, was a series that, in my eyes, was one that lived with me the most. Even if I didn't watch it in its initial airing, in which... Wrong intro. Let's try that again. There we go. Welcome to In Transition, a mini video essay series discussing the various thoughts, feelings, and views on the types of media that have helped me on my ongoing journey with being the woman I am now. And today, we're discussing a show that may have taken the power of 5 to show off, but it has a wicked sense of wonder to me. In which... Now, with which personally, this is one of the shows out of the entire Jetix block that aired when I was younger that I was constantly intrigued by, but I was never properly able to experience it myself due to it airing on a Sunday, and at a specific time that I would always miss it just as my family would rush us off to church on that day. Personally speaking, however, given that I grew up in a conservative Christian household, part of me felt like it was ironic that a show called W.I.T.C.H would elude me until my later years. But in reality, fate is just a bit cruel like that, and I just never got the chance to be able to properly enjoy it as much as I would like to. That being said, however, when I finally managed to come across this show again in late 2019, after going on a weird binge of shows that always came my way slightly when younger, such as Totally Spies or Winx Club, I finally managed to find this show again. And when I binged it for the first time in my life, let's just say I finally understood why the universe kept this from me for so long. Just so you're all aware about this now for when we eventually revisit this period of time, because believe me now, it'll be one we revisit very often moving forward. The mid-2000s were basically a turning point for my enjoyment of certain types of media, and the influx of shows like today's topic and the likes of Totally Spies, and one other really big one that we'll talk about at a big milestone for the series alongside it, were crucial in putting into place what I would expect from my experience in my older years. But in saying that, one look at a series like this, even on face value, may have a lot of people asking a very important question. Haven't we already tread on this sort of ground before, in relation to which, as one look at this series can give you the idea that this series is very much similar to one that we've already covered on this in Sailor Moon. And while it may be easy to write off the similarities as a coincidence, it's worth saying that yes, the similarities between the two are an important topic of discussion, as it's basically because my fascination with shows like Sailor Moon that were the catalyst for me having an interest in shows like Witch. So when my brain saw the promo for this show for the first time, saw the anime influence in its art style, and a similar premise of that of Sailor Moon, I was intrigued by it and wanted to know more. But as we know by now, that wouldn't come to be properly for a good decade. And while a lot of people may be potentially a bit hesitant for me to look at this show in a similar way to what I've done in many in the past, I can tell some people may come across with a bit of hesitancy with discussing which in light of something with queer themes to it that impacted me in a way. You'd be right to question that on a surface level, but if me talking at length about Madeline and impacting my journey was any indication to you all, it's that even if a show isn't part of the pinnacles of queer media that influence a lot of people's taste in culture or media period, that a show can still hold some importance. That being said, however, it isn't exactly like Witch doesn't have any kind of queer theming behind it. It's more a case of the queer theming it has in it being a bit more subdued, both for its time and the company that was basically promoting its sake. So despite being originally written and created by a group of Italian writers, which was published globally not just in its animated form, but also in the comics by Disney. And if there's one thing we've all kind of had to learn one way or another about the House of Mouse, is that their stances on queerness has always been dubious at best and hostile at worst. That's not to say, however, there's no merit behind the idea that there is a level of queer identity in this series. It's more the fact that in order to have it be shown properly, you have to peel back the layers a lot in order to have it be more shown to its full extent. And I find there to be no bigger allegory for queerness in W.I.T.C.H than with Will Vandom's portrayal as a perfect showcasing of a trans allegory within the series, in the comics at least.
For what it's worth, a lot of what we're going to be talking about here does stem from the comics portrayal of the characters in comparison to the TV series, as the series does vary differently at times from the books, and there's about 7 whole series worth of books that delve into these topics a lot more in detail that the television show never covered. But with Will, it's as early as the first volume of the series that shows her character as being a perfect example of accidental transcodedness within a series such as this. As the first arc of the series, which spans the first 3 volumes, shows her being a lot more than just the socially awkward new girl archetype that she was in the TV series. There's a bigger sense of anxiety in general with the group in the comics, something of which doesn't really get properly resolved even with her as the leader of the team until about halfway through the first arc. Something the show overtly doesn't really delve into as much as one would hope. Not only that, but Will's coding of transness further comes through in the way that she perceives herself in Guardian form a lot in private, noting that she feels a lot more confident in that form compared to her standard form every day. Take what you will from that, and you may see it as me clutching at straws to try and find ways to see queer-codedness within such a story as this. But to be honest, with how Disney-based properties in the 2000s, and even now, always seem to have this habit of straightwashing any attempts at queerness, it really would surprise me if this was as subtle as the comics were allowed to be about it. But hey, it's not like this isn't the first time we've talked about characters being explicitly trans-coded without being overtly trans. Looking at you, Makoto. But to be fair to the rest of the series, there's a lot of bits and pieces you could latch onto with this. I won't spoil all of it for various reasons, big ones being you should read this series for yourself, but the way Irma is to Will throughout the majority of the series, like from minute 1 of them being in the same vicinity as each other, you can't tell me that ain't some gay shit. Oh, and don't even get me started on Cornelia's whole feel of Elion is good stuff as well. Nobody gets that dedicated into trying to save someone from being corrupted without having some level of deeper feelings for her.
What I'm trying to say here is that, much like our last experiences in talking about shows like this without having explicit queerness behind them, if you look at it hard enough, you should be able to find it there in one way or another. But, much similar to the ones we looked at previously, that isn't all its meaning has to be in order to provide some level of importance on how a personal journey such as this, as while you can particularly take a show like Witch and apply some queer meanings behind it and have it be the big reason why it means so much, the meaning is a lot more than the sum of its parts. So I think by now it should be clear that this is another show that, even without overtly queer themes behind it, has been something that's kept me on my journey for a long while. It's one that I didn't really get around to much later, however, but the fact that I was willing to seek it out for what it's worth, instead of just leaving it as a show that I barely remembered and shrugged it off as a, oh well, approach to it, means a lot more in the long run, I must say. And spoiler alert, this would not be the only one where it's a vibe similar to this. As when it comes to stuff from this era of time, let's just say that my brain has a very interesting sense of what influenced me during this period, but all of that is for another time. Right now, I want to circle around to the bit that kind of started us all off here, the similarities between this and Sailor Moon. I joked earlier about this essentially being the West equivalent to Sailor Moon, but in reality, it's not like it was entirely wrong. It's more the fact that the way I would compare this and Sailor Moon together is a lot different than one would think, as they were both integral to allowing me to be shown media of this nature with female-centric casts and showing them as complete badasses.
And on that same line of logic when it comes to the characters for comparison, much like Usagi before her, it isn't exactly like Will isn't the only one that I primarily lean towards personally as a character, which I took major inspiration from. Well, she was the main one for social anxiety and slight ADHD coded reasons, but over time I've come to realize that, much like Sailor Moon, there's two others I lean heavily towards as well. First one being Cornelia, and once again, it's not because of the blonde hair. Initially, when going back to this series, I had my reservations on calling Cornelia one I would personally see as an influence on my own style outside of Will, but it's her arc in Season 1 with Elion that really turned it around for me. As with Cornelia going from the self-obsessed popular girl archetype that really feels like she could have been a Regina George XP if it wasn't made before that movie came out, to the only one who's willing to keep trying to bring her friend back even when it's clear she doesn't want her around, or feared she's turned to the dark side. That, alongside a lot of literal moments spread throughout the course of Season 2 and the comics after the fact, in my honest opinion, makes Cornelia one of the characters I feel more personally connected to. But it also doesn't help that she is very much goals appearance-wise. However, as much as I want to say that my goals period are specifically defined by her, I gotta be honest, Irma is also there as a big one to me personally, and it's probably for the weirdest of reasons, as her influence is one that just makes me feel more confident about being unladylike, I guess is the right term for it. Her voice is one that I specifically look at in terms of admiring and think to myself, you know what, that's kind of the voice I like. That and her general gremlin-like behavior during the run is one that lives with me personally. Like I said, not exactly a huge influence on what I can say impacted me with her character-wise throughout the series, but I can at least say that was a big thing for me when coming back to this. But once again, not to take away anything from the likes of Tarani and Haylin, I just personally feel like compared to the others beforehand, they aren't as big for me personally. With that being said, however, I do relate to Haylin as someone who nearly had braces in high school due to her own teeth being messed up, and given she has that happen from Season 2 or Book 2 onwards, I feel that struggle a lot, so that's there for what it's worth. End of the day, this show, its characters, and the general vibe it gives off means a lot to me personally. Once again, even if it isn't the most queer rep-heavy thing in the world, it still means a ton because of how much it's lived with me and allowed me to seek out bits of media like it. And if Sailor Moon was the one to stand in place for me when I was younger and be something to live with me for those times through to now, then Witch to me is a similar vein because of how it lived with me alongside many others in my adolescent years, and its influence and how it managed to sit with me for so long cannot be understated. And even beyond all of that, it's an amazing series with a wonderfully cheesy heart at its core, and its part in influencing me as a person deserves to be praised highly for, even if this show never had a chance to really show off how much of an amazing series it is in full. But hey, with news of there being a reboot of the comics coming out later this year, maybe if that does well, there might be a chance of something similar to a revival being done for this series. Until then, however, its influence as a cornerstone of mid-2000s joy is something that lives for me even today, and deserves to be remembered fondly for all of its charm, and then some.
But of course, as you all should know by now, that I'm not the only one who's felt like this when it comes to this series. So to speak on their own feelings on this series and how it affected her is a good friend of mine in Alexis Vandom.
I first discovered Witch when I was just a young kid in elementary school. I remember watching the trailers and commercials for the show on Jetix and falling in love with the characters and the idea of a group of young girls saving the world. But the most influential moment for me was the first appearance of the team's leader, Will Vandom. Even though I knew absolutely nothing about her at the time, I felt an instant and unbreakable kinship with her. That was a big deal for me, not only because I had spent practically all of my time in school being bullied by my peers and feeling stuck in my own mind, but because I had never felt represented by any character in any medium until that moment. Thankfully, I was still young enough at that point that I could read the graphic novels without drawing any real attention to myself, and so that's what I did. Well, sort of. At that point, I could only ever really get my hands on a fragment of the first graphic novel. But honestly, that was more than enough. When the other kids decided not to play kickball during recess, I would tuck myself into one of the little brick nooks in the wall alongside the field and read the first few pages again and again, finding myself utterly entranced every single time by the dream sequence that kicked off Will's transformation into the brave protector she was always meant to be. Something deep within me clicked while I pored over those pages. I didn't know what it was, but I could sense that it was something fundamental, existential even. Once I could tear myself away from that sequence, I would speed through the story to find the instances in which Will began seeing herself as a grown woman and as a guardian in different mirrors and windows. Every one of those instances resonated with me, but the one which always struck me the hardest involved her standing in front of her own mirror in her room, staring at a version of herself which was fully grown and just as confused and befuddled as she was. Her mother walked in at that very moment, and Will quickly shielded herself as best as she could, almost as if she was afraid that her mother would see her for who she truly was. There were a lot of transcoded moments in that graphic novel, but that had to have been the most in-your-face moment of them all. And it spoke to me in a way that I understood yet couldn't quite comprehend. Sadly, Will's journey of self-discovery was glossed over quite a bit in the animated adaptation, but I still found myself resonating with her every single time she appeared on screen. In a way, I would often feel as though I was simultaneously wishing I could be her and that I was her in one way or another. To say it was all a bit trippy would be an understatement, but it was euphoria-inducing all the same. I loved the idea of walking around school with a tight-knit group of female friends, whispering about cute boys one moment and figuring out how to save the day the next. Will's growing relationship with Matt also spoke to me on a deep level, as I was also attracted to boys but was too afraid to say anything about it. Hell, I barely understood it. Suffice to say that I was very much rooting for their relationship and definitely squealed when they became a couple. The icing on the cake for me was Will's somewhat gender non-conforming personality and interests, as she was simultaneously a bit of a girly girl and a total tomboy. I absolutely loved that aspect of her character, and it made me feel more comfortable with having diverse and gender non-conforming interests myself. All of that being said, I can't say that Will was the only character I resonated with. I also felt a significant connection with the animated version of Elion Brown, as I too was a conflicted and tortured kid desperate to discover who I truly was. It broke my heart watching her go through so much anguish at the hands of those she trusted, but as the child of a mother and father who had just gone through a bitter divorce and openly held all kinds of animosity toward each other, I understood exactly what that felt like. It was certainly a relief to see her break away from all of that and become a wise and kind leader despite the trauma and manipulation she had endured. I didn't know it at the time, but I was destined to go through a pretty similar transformation myself later in life. Whether or not I've become a wiser person is for others to determine, but I certainly believe I've become a better person despite everything that happened to me while growing up. I finally discovered my gender identity when I was about 22 years old, and when it came time for me to choose my new name, I knew without a shadow of a doubt I was going to take Will's last name as my own. How could I not? She had changed my life in so many distinct and wonderful ways as a child. In many ways, she was my comfort character. Hell, I had even mentioned her by name when I came out to my friend Tina, who had ironically been using the screen name Which I Am Will at the time that I met her. I very nearly took Elion's name as my middle name as well, but I ultimately decided against it. That said, I still admire her character, and I'm sure I always will. Honestly, I'm sure I'll admire all the protagonists in some way. Irma's kindness, Tarani's bravery, Cornelia's loyalty, Haylen's confidence. Every single one of those amazing ladies could easily inspire countless others to become the best versions of themselves, and I have no doubt that they did. That's what makes their stories so memorable. That's what makes this series so timeless. That's the true magic of Witch.
Thank you for watching this episode of In Transition on Witch. There we go. Yeah, this one once again was a bit of an interesting one, mainly because of the timing of this one. See, as I was finishing scripting on this video, and as I was literally getting done recording on this video, apparently they're making a Witch revival, so props to me for somehow managing to make this at the best possible time, and apparently that revival's coming out this year, so like, I know, right? Big news. That's huge, I guess. And I'm like, damn, that's good timing. And like, I'm of course like really hyped for this, but also I'm just like, man, I really hope the original series still gets some pretty good love, even if the reboot does really good, because like, I really want the reboot to do pretty good. I think anybody who likes Witch really wants this reboot to do good, so hey, we got that to look forward to.
Hey, so future Chloe talking here now. The reboot's fine. This is me coming into it with, like, the fact that there's only been 2 volumes of it published technically at this point. There's still a lot to really say about it, given the fact that it's still very early on at this point in time, but I want it to do good. I feel like everybody wants to have it do good at this point, but it's still very early on, and there's a lot of things that are still very iffy about it, but only time can tell. Do I like it with the new direction that the characters are going in? Not so much with some of them. Will's direction is a bit interesting. Haylin and Tirani essentially are the ones I feel like have the most drastic ones, and I don't really like the way they're going with it. And Cornelia's whole thing is a bit interesting as well. Don't even get me started on Irma, by the way. But do I feel like it can do good? Yes, definitely. Do I think it's going in the right direction right now? Not yet. But again, it's only 2 volumes in, and I want to support it, and I want it to do good. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the reboot.
But, hey, if you have any history or with the original series, or if you have any excitement for the new series coming out, do let me know in the comments down below, and do be sure to share your stories about how Witch has impacted you as a personal thing, because you know how we love sharing stories like this on this series. But, until next time, catch you later, and take care.